Next, we're going to learn a little bit about supporting the most common operating systems. So let's start off with Windows 9X. The Windows 9X family includes Windows 95, Windows 98, and the new Windows Millennium Edition. Let's look at an overview of what we're going to cover. We're going to talk about the fundamental ways in which Windows 9X differs from DOS and from Windows 3X. And we're going to talk about ways to support Windows 9X, including installation, memory management, the registry, and some general troubleshooting. Now, Windows 9X bridges a gap between Windows 3X and DOS and Windows NT. In Windows NT, the Windows NT kernel is also found in Windows 2000 operating systems, which we'll talk about later in this training. But it bridges a gap between Windows 3X and DOS and Windows NT and 2000. Windows 9X can use a 16-bit or a 32-bit core, can use virtual machines, can do memory paging, can control base and upper memory, and also extended memory. The core components of Windows 9X are the kernel. The main files in the kernel are the kernel32.dll and the kernel386.exe. These handle the basic operating system functions like managing memory, file input-output, and loading and executing programs. Then there's what's called user components, user32.dll and user.exe, which control the mouse, the keyboard ports, and the desktop. And then the GDI. The GDI is the graphical data interface, which draws screens, graphics, lines, and prints them. Now, Windows 9X architecture makes it extremely flexible. Just as DOS and Windows 3X each provided a shell for a user interface, Windows 9X provides a group of user interface tools and a shell for applications. And the configuration data that was once stored in the 3x.ini files, the initialization files, is now stored in the Windows 9X registry. So the registry has replaced the initialization files. So Windows 9X architecture is extremely flexible and can use 16-bit or 32-bit programs. DOS and Windows 3X only support 16-bit applications. So Windows 9X contains some 16-bit code and some 32-bit code, so it can bridge the gap. If it's possible, it's preferable to use 32-bit drivers. 32-bit is extremely faster than 16-bit. If you can picture 32-bit versus 16-bit is like a 16-lane highway versus a 32-lane highway. But then when we get into the properties of binary numbers, once we understand a little bit more about that, which we'll talk a little bit more about when we talk about communication, then you'll understand that 32-bit is tremendously faster than 16-bit. It can be stored in extended memory, and it can be dynamically loaded. Now, Windows 9X can create what we call virtual machines. Virtual machines are multiple logical machines that are created within one physical machine. So the advantage of a virtual machine is that an application can crash within one logical machine without disturbing other programs. The memory management process is called paging. What memory paging does is swaps blocks of RAM to an area on the hard drive to serve as a virtual memory when RAM is low. The method that Windows 9X uses is possible to use both with 16-bit programs as well as 32-bit programs. And it uses a virtual memory manager and swaps 4 kilobyte pages in and out of physical RAM. But just like anything else, too much of a good thing is not good. And so it's possible to have excessive memory paging. Symptoms of excessive memory paging would be very high CPU use, very slow system response, and constant hard drive use, also called disk thrashing. This is because what the system is trying to do is survive off of its virtual memory instead of off of RAM. The way to fix this is to add more RAM to the PC. There are many things that can be fixed by just adding more RAM, and certainly memory paging, excessive memory paging, is one of these. Now, Windows 9X installation requires the right environment, and we're going to talk about that in our next section.